my stated topic for tonight is creativity as applied to practice. And I am going to talk about that and save some time for questions and answers, but also I'd like to save maybe 15 or 20 minutes at the end to do a guided meditation for peace, a metta meditation. Is that okay? Yeah. Because there's a lot, I'm sure a lot of us are distressed with what's happening in the world. So let's first address our practice, and because we need to be in balance if we're to do anything positive to help without just stirring the pot and creating more chaos. But then it's really part of practice, and it's our obligation, of course, to allow concern in for the state of the world and others into our practice. So, one of the things I've noticed about Zen practice is on the surface, it can look structured, hierarchical at times, kind of a little bit stiff. Things are done in a certain way, right? Excuse my cough, the tree pollens I'm allergic to. And we've had a lot of wind lately up in Taos, so it's been stirring me up. Thankfully, there's a whole tub of cough drops out there, which I've partaken of. Thank you. Yeah, I got some. So Zen can look as though it's very structured, always done the same way, very traditional, even a little stiff, a little hierarchical at times, a little tight. And that can sometimes, when people walk into a Zen day, they feel all on edge and not knowing what to do, and am I doing it right, and all of that. We've probably, those of us who practice for a while, have all probably experienced that at some point and been through it. And hopefully come out the other side, because the underside of Zen is, I was just talking to a friend about this, is that there's a real irreverence, humor, creativity, and playfulness about the practice that might not immediately be obvious on the surface. And the way it most obviously plays out for a lot of us is if we take on koan practice. I wonder how many people are doing koan practice. How about at home? Yeah, so if you've gotten a certain way into koan practice, you've figured out that part of the deal is that you have to be willing to make a fool out of yourself, right? You have to be willing to get it wrong, right? And some koans, to address them properly, they require a certain spontaneity, playfulness, even irreverence. They certainly require creativity. Sometimes the way to address a koan is even to be willing to get silly, to be silly. But the whole setup, when you go in to meet the teacher one-on-one, can look rather intimidating, right? If you're new, you wouldn't necessarily think that you're supposed to address this conundrum that you're faced with by, for instance, I don't know, imitating a buffalo or something. You know, that the things that you sometimes have to do. And of course, it's actually, it's taken me a long time. I've been practicing for 37 years. It's taken me a long time to really figure this out, but the whole system is set up to bring up our egos, right? To make us think like, am I getting it wrong? Am I getting it right? Am I doing it, am I going to make a fool out of myself? Oh no, what do people think? And all that stuff that goes with the ego, right? So one of the things we tend to be concerned with when we go in to face a teacher, especially early on in our practice, is we want to make a good showing, right? It's completely wrong. It has nothing to do with making a good showing, right? It has to do with, because that's the ego, right? And the teacher, we don't have to impress the teacher. We're not going to impress the teacher at first, no doubt. You know, the best thing you can do when you're face to face with the teacher is become vulnerable. Show. If you're scared, be scared. If you're confident, be confident. If you're feeling uptight, be uptight, but try and shake it off. You know, a little bit. If you get embarrassed, great, because when we're embarrassed, what part of us is hurt? Only the ego, right? Only the ego self is. Nobody ever dies from embarrassment, although sometimes we wish we would, you know. But it's not a fatal condition. So embarrassment is great because we see our ego right in front of us, and maybe we can just admit it. Maybe we can admit that we feel self-conscious, or that we feel embarrassed, or whatever it is. I used to be really, really shy when I was a kid and young adult. I don't know what happened, but my teachers now often joke that I'm in the White Plum lineage, and my transmission teacher is Jerry Shishin-Wick, who's at Great Mountain Zen Center in Colorado. He and his wife, who's also a Roshi, Shinko Roshi, they run the center together, and they often joke that I'm the only known extrovert in Zen practice, because of course it tends to attract the shyer types. But certainly koan practice and just dealing with your teacher kind of demands that we reveal ourselves. So I encourage us to reveal ourselves as much as possible and be willing to appear foolish. We'll make much better progress if we can speak of progress. If we can speak of Zen in those terms. There's so many funny paradoxes in Zen. That's one of them. You know, in the Zendo you do everything kind of just so, and in front of the teacher you can do anything and say anything, really. And you may get it wrong, but so what? You know. One of the things I've encountered a fair amount in talking to people at other practice centers, since I don't have a specific practice center of my own, I have kind of a floating nonprofit. It's called the Sage Institute, and I do work with students individually, and we also train people to be meditation leaders, not spiritual teachers, but to share basic meditation practice in the same way a yoga teacher, for instance, goes through a 200-hour training to not become a spiritual teacher, but to share yoga techniques. We do a similar thing. If you're interested, you could look up sagetaos.com, Sage plus Taos. So that's a lot of what I do, but I visit and give talks at other centers a lot. And it's not uncommon, especially if I give a talk about creativity, that someone will come up to me afterwards. Probably not going to happen here, but some of the bigger centers, you know, there might be 75 people listening or something, you know. And people will come up to me afterwards, because what I'm going to encourage you is to be creative in your practice, you know, to not get stuck on the technique, to not get stuck on any technique, but to be able to be fluid and spontaneous within yourself. I mean, we're sitting here on the surface, it all looks the same, right? But what we're doing inside, who knows? You know? It takes a creativity to keep practice alive over time. It's not uncommon for me to have somebody come up to me after a talk and say, yeah, you know, I studied with so-and-so, and I started 30 years ago, and then he died, you know, or then I had to move away, and they taught me, so-and-so taught me how to count the breath, and so I'm just counting the breath ever since. I think after 30 years of counting the breath, they're just, in other words, they got one set of rules and they've just been following it, you know? And some people get so stuck on the rules that you're there counting the breath very determinedly. Counting the breath's a wonderful practice. I still do it to just kind of check myself. You know, it's a great practice, but it's not the only practice. Yeah. It's a skillful means, like many of our practices. But some people will be so hung up on counting the breath that like the whole ineffable oneness of the glorious mystery of the universe opens up over here, and they're like, no, I'm counting the breath. Now, if the ineffable glory of the wholeness of the entire universe opens up over here or there, it's not really anywhere in here maybe, drop counting the breath and head for that, you know? So there's so many paradoxes in Zen. We're warned against certain things very often. You know, we're warned against, for one thing, judging our practice. And it's true, there's no such thing as a bad practice. But if you have 10 years of bad practice, then it's really 10 years of bad practice. And if you've been practicing for a while, you should be able to know when it's not working for you. You know, my practice has been unusual in that I came to practice really desperate because I was 30 years old when I started formal practice. I had been practicing some on my own before then, but when I was 30, my health collapsed and I developed chronic fatigue syndrome and nobody knew what it was. And I'd go to doctors and they had no idea what it was or what to do for it, or they'd think it was just imaginary or it was all in my head. Now everybody knows somebody with this issue, right? It's become a very cool disease. Everybody's got it. But back then, 37 years ago, all the cool people didn't have it yet. It was just me. And so I went to Zen I just thought I'm going to do the most intense thing I can figure out. You know, I was already meditating some. And, you know, if I hadn't got sick, I don't think I would have gone for Zen because it's tough. It's intense, right? And I don't, you know, my natural personality is undisciplined and, you know, fishy and creative and spontaneous and avoiding of anything that looks like responsibility or authority, right? I was a hippie at the time, you know. But it worked for me. It really worked for me. When I could, you know, there were times I could barely get out of bed and I started doing sessions. And I don't even know how I did them, but it built up my internal energy and my personal ability to endure, among other things. And it had a lot to do with making me functional instead of becoming just, you know, instead of just kind of folding up in a corner somewhere and bemoaning my sad life. But I knew I was kind of in deep doo-doo when I started the practice, and I was pretty desperate. And so, you know, we have this balance. We have teachers, and we need to listen to our teachers. But on the other hand, if we just listen to our teachers and only do what they tell us to do, they can't know everything that's inside of us. I've come to believe after many, many years, I've been teaching university students meditation for credit for something like 20 years. They used to do meditation for merit, right? In the old days in China, you'd gain merits for, you know, some future lifetime or something. Now you get credits towards a degree. But anyway, so I've worked with used to be a lot of my college students had never meditated. Now I have a class that comes in and they're all familiar with meditation. But they have all these different ideas about it often. And like me, they tend to be resistant to authority and resistant to being told what to do and all those things. And, you know, one of the things we have to learn in Zen, if you do a sesshin, you just conform, right? You conform to the schedule, you show up, and you do it. But I started out with a Japanese teacher, Maizumi Roshi at Zen Center of Los Angeles back in the 80s. And I had already done therapy, and it helped me a lot, psychotherapy. And it wasn't the whole solution for me, especially not after I got sick. Zazen became a much more complete solution. But one of the things I learned really quickly is I could not go to a Japanese teacher and talk about emotions that were coming up in sitting. Forget it, you know? be like we are with thoughts. Just let go of them, go back to the breath, take no notice of them, basically. And my first generation American teachers, my first close teacher was John Daido Luri at Zen Mountain Monastery in upstate New York. I practiced with him for 17 years. Even though I never lived there, I was a student at Naropa, and he would come out and teach a lot. And I was a student assistant when he would come out and teach, because I got my MFA there. And I would go out to the monastery and spend time, etc. I did a lot of training with him. But, he was the same way. He was trained by Japanese teachers, and forget it, bring up a soft, gushy thing like emotions, forget it, So but when emotion, probably for my first 10 years of doing retreats, and I did a lot of them, I would just have these balls of emotion come up, and I couldn't talk to my teachers about it. So I wasn't going to let go of them. I just knew in my own heart that, plus I'd done therapy. It's like all we dealt with in therapy was emotions, right? So I thought this stuff's important. Of course, now there's so many therapists that have come into Zen, and the whole thing's changed. And we have Scott over here, who's a therapist, and I don't know how you all deal with emotions here, but I imagine you're not just told to just ignore them and go back to the breath. I imagine there's a more inclusive way of dealing with them. And I really, so I turned my attention towards them, and I just didn't talk to my teachers about it. I also thought the backup of emotions might have something to do with why I was sick, although I still have that condition, but it's a lot better. But if any of you want to go out drinking sake after this for hours and stay up all night, I can't do that. I still have to take care of this condition, or it'll come back and sweep over me again. But I've learned to deal with it really well. So that kind of set me off on, I was always attracted to the renegade streak in Zen, but it's easy to walk into a Zen center and not see the renegade streak, right? I don't know about here. I've been playing guitar with Scott a little bit, and I was joking with him that we're the only known senior Zen people with ponytails, right? Because we're lay people, So I guess maybe I got a little renegade streak here, but I don't know about those of you who are elder. Probably a lot of us were attracted to the reading Jack Kerouac and those people, and it just sounded like, Zen was a free-for-all. We could do whatever we wanted and have a wild time and still get enlightened. But then we walk in and it all seems very structured, and we get swept into that. But I think after we've been practicing for a while, to circle back to when are we having a good sitting and when are we not having a good sitting, it's true that there's no such thing as a bad meditation. We have to be, it's just like working out or something, or it's like playing a musical instrument. Some days most of the time it's going to feel good, but every once in a while you're going to have a lousy day, right? And it's the same thing with Zen. But if all you have is lousy days, and you're sitting there thinking, or distracted, or anxious, or restless, or falling asleep, well, we need to acknowledge that it's not working and do something creative to reawaken it. We do the same thing. It takes years to progress beyond a certain point in Zen practice. My college students come in for a semester, and you know what? Within a month of taking on even a semi-regular practice, well, my joke is the first thing they report is that their families, children, parents, and spouses are all behaving better. But of course, they're getting less reactive already after a month. So we all know the early fruits of meditation. We get a little bit calmer, a little less reactive, a little more clear-headed. But then I heard somebody once say, every 10 years something important happens in Zen, in our Zen practice. And it's not so far from the truth, not to discourage anyone. I wouldn't say that to my university students because they want 4 years in graduation, right? But let's just say there are stretches where it can feel like we're on a plateau or we're not sure what's happening, and we have to do something to ignite our energy and our interest. So just a few things I've discovered that have been helpful. One is to remember that underneath the various techniques that we do to meditate, and I get this a lot because of my college students, they've taken Kundalini yoga and they've taken yoga and they've taken Tai Chi and Qigong and other meditation methods. And it's all about the breath moves this way, no, the breath moves that way, no, it's all about the energy body, no, it's about all this stuff. It's, I always boil it down to, it's about being in the present moment, which means we're bringing our attention out of our heads and again back to the reality of our life. So I present Zazen, Zen meditation as the practice of reality. Now, reality is not always comfortable. But a lot of the times, most of the time, it's actually pretty good. Like, is this moment now okay? Yeah, most moments are like this. They're okay. They're actually a little bit on the upside of down. I mean, maybe we're not as ecstatic as if we were, bungee jumping while tripping on mushrooms and having an orgasm, all at once. We tend to want these giant peak experiences. But hey, just being once you get along in life and you know how tough it can be, isn't it nice to just be on the upside of down? And if we're really looking at most moments, most of them are like that. It's nice to be here with you. Our whole life is happening right now. We're spending our whole lives together. And you're really nice people to spend my whole life with. Thank you. Everything else is projection, isn't it? It's memory or future thinking. So to go back to the creativity, we all know that we need to sit for our practice to develop. We all know that we need to listen to or read, take in the teaching somehow. Sometimes we're too shy to do the third thing, which I've discovered is really important, which is we need to contemplate, which means we need to think some. Not when we're on the cushion necessarily, but in between times. We hear talk about emptiness, or we hear her talk about no self, and we're supposed to wonder what that means and contemplate it a bit when we're out in our life and, when we're sitting under a tree or having a cup of tea in the morning. And then we're meant to come back and check it against our practice. So when we get into one of those empty, absorbed places in our practice and there's nothing much happening, and we're just kind of in the stillness. I know that never happens except for a second at a time. No, for some of us, it's more accessible than for others. For some people, it's brief. But when we're in that moment, who are we? It's a good question to ask. This is part of what the koans are about. They're to raise that, their skillful means to raise that spirit of inquiry. And of course, every method has its drawbacks. We don't want to go beyond inquiry to grasping, right? But on the other hand, we don't want to stop inquiring and just be perfectly passive in our practice. Then kind of nothing happens, right? We want to be saying, what do they mean by this no self thing? I sure seem like I'm here. What is that about? And emptiness, is everything really, I look at the world and it seems pretty full. I don't know what they're talking, to really turn these things over and wonder about them, keep that spirit of inquiry and wonder alive is really important. To notice, for instance, at what point in the breath, this was really pivotal for me. Does anybody want to answer, at what point in the breath is there a point in the physical breath where maybe everything seems to stop, if only for an instant? Where do you find it?
At the top, sort of.
At the top. So at the top of the breath, meaning you've inhaled and you're not starting to exhale yet, and that turning point. Yeah, I'm sorry, what's your name?
Julie.
Julie, where do you find it, Julie?
I find it in both places. I find it at the top of the breath, and then after the exhale, there's a pause.
Yeah.
After the inhale, there's a pause.
Yeah, people often find between the breaths, in that moment between the breaths, There's a moment where everything seems to stop. It's not a pause for everyone. It's, but it is a turning point. You can't inhale while still exhaling, right? So there's a moment there where it turns. And often, everything seems to settle. Everything seems to stop. Now, this is another of the paradoxes. We're taught not to get attached to anything. Well, don't get attached to it, but recognize, appreciate the stillness, and invite it to remain a little bit. With that, grasping won't work. So it doesn't matter. If we try grasping, we're gonna mess it up. But if you notice that stillness and you center yourself there, hey, some of it might stick through the rest of the breath. I discovered that really early on. For me, it was after the exhale, just before the inhale begins, right in that turning point. Hey, everything seems still, perfectly still. I started to signal that to my university students because it used to take me half a semester to get them sitting well. Now I signal them to look for that still point and to just appreciate and settle into it. It's like encouraging your shoulders not to rise when you're in front of the computer, right? You can't grasp after, you can't say, don't tense up shoulders. You have to kind of go, ooh, easy guys, let's take it easy. It's a bit like that, easy. Oh, this is a still moment. Maybe this is what meditation, maybe this is a door to something. It is a door to something. It's the door to what we call samadhi, right? But if we're not really paying attention and we're not willing, I never was taught that. I just noticed it. Now I do teach it to university students because I got to get them sitting well in a semester. It used to be in the monasteries. You'd sign in when you were young and you'd have a whole lifetime there. So if it took you 10 years to find stillness, oh well, you had the time. But it's okay to orient yourself towards something that feels right and to experiment with it and see if you can stay with it a little, and what can you do to cultivate that, to make that come around, to make that linger a little bit. It's not the same as graspy attachment. It's not the same, So, and then if that's never happening in our practice, and I've gone through phases like that. There was one point, I don't know, might have been 4 years into my practice or something. And I was doing monastic practice and sessions and stuff, but I just started to notice in my home practice, wait a minute, I'm not meditating, I'm just sitting here thinking. And I've probably been doing that for months, and I just somehow hadn't noticed it. There's this funny amnesia. We can slide into this zone where we're half sitting and half thinking, or we can slide into these spacey or sleepy zones. It's not what it's about, It should have some crispness about it. And if we're not accessing that stillness, well, what can we do creatively for ourselves to find our way into it again? Nobody can tell us what it's like for us. I had one of my university students in one of my classes one year. It was a young woman, I think she's 19 years old, very young. And most of my students I get students in their 80s also. One of the lovely things about UNM Taos is I get all the generations, but she was quite young. She came up to me after I gave my first class and she said, "Oh, I'm so glad you taught me the right way to meditate." She said, "Ever since I was 12 years old, I just discovered that if I closed my eyes and brought to mind this image of a white rose, that I would just kind of sink into this tranquil stillness and all my problems would seem to go away. But I'm really glad now you've taught me the right way to meditate." I said, no, you already know the right way to meditate. Just keep doing the white rose. The thing is, eventually the white rose will probably wear out because our ego will find ways around any technique. And then we have to be creative and find something else again. But as long as the white rose is working for her, just stay with that, A lot of people figure out how to meditate on their own. One of the reasons people like to sit and look into a fire or sit by flowing water is it draws us into that state sometimes naturally, or sit by the ocean. And a lot of us have something that we love, that we get completely absorbed in. Might be dancing or music or woodworking or an art. It might be horseback riding or sport or something that we love, and we think we love it because we love the activity. And it is true. I love music because I love music. That's part of it. But beyond that, what makes it so enjoyable is I'm completely in the present moment when I'm doing it. And that's something we tend to not identify. We tend to think, oh, it's the horse. You know, and you can spend a lot of money on a horse and spend a lot of time mucking out stables, and you could just meditate, it'd be a lot easier. Yeah, still ride horseback from time to time. You know, my point being that we tend to know that state of complete absorption. I mean, in Zen we call it working samadhi. You know, it's samadhi, it's absorption that happens in the midst of activity. But it is a samadhi state, and it's the same thing we're working on when we're sitting. It's not different from that. We're just cultivating it in a broader way and more across the board in our sitting practice. So just a few things that I noticed helped me cultivate that. It's that feeling of absorption or stillness that leads to deeper and deeper states. I'm sure a lot of us know it. For a long time before I figured out that I could work with it and cultivate it a bit and kind of find ways to access it. Because at first I would find it in retreats a lot of times, but I didn't quite know how it was happening. So I started working on techniques to help keep that alive, because in a home practice, in a busy life, it's so easy for that to slip away. One thing I had to do for myself is when I hit that point where the first thing was finding that still point in the breath and saying to myself, I don't think it's attachment to cultivate this a little bit. I don't think that's the same thing as grasping or attachment. I think this is the thing, and I'm going to go there and work with that. Working with a still point. You know, once you're centered in the still point, if you practice it enough, that's the way I practice now. I sit down and I wait for the moment between the thoughts. I put my attention there, and I just do my best to stay there. That's really my only method now. If I start to get too scattered, or if I spend too much time on the internet, then I'll go back to counting the breath. I do use that just to make sure. But that was the first thing. But after I realized that I'd been thinking for months instead of meditating, I had to define for myself what thinking was. How did I know I was thinking? Isn't that funny? We all have thinking going on in our heads all the time. And it's our biggest hindrance, arguably, in meditation. And yet, I was probably late into my 30s when I defined for myself what thinking was. It seems really obvious now, but when there are words coming through my head and I'm getting caught in them, that is called thinking. You know, it was so helpful, because then it was a lot less. I was a lot less likely to get caught by the next words that came through my head. If I didn't crisply identify for myself what thinking was, then I could be tripped into thinking because I wasn't quite noticing what it was, you know? Then I had to broaden that out, because thinking can also be little movies, right? That's also thinking. So then I had to recognize, okay, the internal monologue is thinking, but also little movies and replaying scenes and imaginary scenes and stuff, that's thinking too. So if there's little movies I'm getting caught in, or if there's strings of words I'm getting caught in, that's thinking. So if that's happening, just tell myself that's happening. It's pretty hard to fool myself and let myself be drawn into them, right? Then, just like I said with the white rose, techniques will stop working. So I had to get a little more precise. So at a certain point, it was really helpful for me to notice that the vast majority of my thoughts were about past or future. And to tell myself past or future is never what we're doing in meditation. We're doing reality, which is only happening now. When we were kids, we knew how to do reality. Every other being except adult humans that shares the planet with us lives in reality. We're the only ones that draw ourselves out of reality, think about the past and future, and analyze the present moment, and cause yourself all this trouble. You know, when my little chihuahua is happy, he's just happy. If something's hurting, he's hurting. But, you know, we're always going to have to deal with hurting when it's hurting. But he's not anticipating how long is this going to last? Will I ever get over it? How long has it been going on? Oh, I've been suffering a long time. Oh, poor me. All that stuff. The Chihuahua doesn't do. He's much smarter than me. If I'm not careful, I'll do all those things, right? And cause myself a lot more suffering. So then I got to the point where I just crisply would notice, that's a thought about the past. That can't be something I'm getting caught in or I'm not meditating. You know, I had to get really precise about what meditating was. It's not, you know. And also, if it's not about past and future, it's about judging the present. There are other categories of thought. Sometimes great insight comes through thought. You know, if that happens, let it run for a while, you know. Or if a great creative insight or solution to a problem comes, you can spend a meditation period dealing with that. That's a positive, useful thought. But we're talking about, of course, if you were having brilliant, inspirational thoughts every meditation period, then you're not meditating anymore. But mostly the problematic thoughts are the problematic ones, right? So they have to do with past or future, or judging the present moment. Judging the present moment is like, am I doing this right? No, I'm doing this wrong. Yeah, Scott's doing it better than me. Oh, he's sitting he looks like he's probably enlightened already. Look how still he sits. But just because we're not doing judgment when we're sitting doesn't mean we can't notice if we're not really doing it. That's a shade of difference, right? Sometimes I define that as discernment versus judgment. You know, we're discerning that we're not really practicing or we're not practicing well. It's okay. You know, I've sometimes had people, especially in the Soto school of Zen. I'm in a mixed lineage, Soto and Rinzai, so I'm not dissing any school of Zen, but I had a monk in a really pure Soto lineage once say to me, yeah, well, I do Shikantaza just sitting, so I just sit there and think about whatever I want. And I was like, that's not, you know, that's not practice, you know. It's not just sitting doesn't mean just sitting like that. You know, we have to use some discernment. So we're allowed to do that. If we've been practicing for a while, we're allowed to know when it's working, when it isn't working. Eventually, I got to the point, I'll take some questions in a minute, but eventually I got to the point where, okay, you know, anything that's coming, any object that's coming through my mind that I'm getting fastened on, forget it. It doesn't matter if it's a movie or if it's words. Anything that arises in the mind that I'm getting stuck on is not the point. The point, anything that's an object of awareness isn't really the point. We'll use an object of awareness like the breath to focus ourselves up, but it's not the point. If you feel you're getting focused up and into the still place, you can in fact, you should let go of technique. Then you're just in the stillness. Then the universe is doing you. Up until that point, Sean's doing. As long as Sean's doing, Sean's ego is there. Now, we have to do doing to get into the practice, but then at a certain point, we want to get out of the way. You know, we need to get out of the way. And the universe knew how to grow this arm. I didn't do it, right? You know, so it knows how to grow us spiritually and in insight as well. So, so at a certain point, it became clear, wait, it's not just thoughts, it's any object of awareness that I'm getting fastened on. That's not the point. The point is the awareness, isn't it? You know, that was so helpful because it's just like anything that comes up, it's like, that's not it. You know, anything that becomes an object within awareness, that's not it. That was so helpful for the longest time. And then these things tend to stop working. I got to find something else, you know. But this is all the stuff that goes on inside that keeps the ways by which I've managed to keep my practice alive over 37 years with some dead spots. We're going to have some dead spots. We're going to have some flat spots. We're going to have some difficult spots. But it's okay to discern when that's happening and bring ourselves up, bring ourselves out of it. I want to take some questions. And I want at least a few minutes to do a little bit of meta for peace. But does anyone have any questions, comments, complaints, issues, arguments, objections?
I notice patterns of thought, repetitive thoughts.
Yeah.
That's when I know I'm not meditating.
Right, yeah. You know, some of you may have trained in lineages that I used to get this early in my practice that would say cut off thoughts or push thoughts away or, you know, even suppress them. And I do not agree with that style of practice. My core teachers always said, see the thought, it's only trying to help you. It's just trying to give you some information. Be friendly to it, and then just have the attitude like you would with a kid that's bothering you when you're, you know, when you're running your 18-inch power saw, you know, and the 5-year-old comes in and wants your attention. It's like, not now, you know, I'll get back to you later. That's the attitude kindly to have with our thoughts, and then just bring our attention back to the present moment, and that way we get to see the thought. So we're studying the mind while we're calming the mind, and we're training the mind, and yeah, seeing these patterns can be so helpful because it gets to be like, oh my God, not this again. You know, I'm so sick of that one. You know, sometimes that's what it takes for me to let go of it. It's like, oh my God, I'm just not gonna give this one any attention anymore. You know, I see it, but I'm doing this, you know? And yeah, it's true. Seeing the patterns of thinking can be really, really useful, really helpful in helping us to let them go. Yeah. Anybody, let's see, how do I see everyone at home in a way where I know if you raise your hand or anything?
I have a question.
I see Tom's raising his hand. Hold on, I need to turn on my sound, which might give us a little bit of an echo. I never quite know how to deal with this.
It might come over the speaker.
Oh, okay, Tom.
Hi. I am in Australia. I practice photography. Also, I'm a fan of the work of John Dado Laurie. And if I may just ask for a story or some reflection on your time with him.
Oh, geez. Yeah, Dido was a major creative. That was part of the connection with him that I had with him. The first summer I was at Naropa in my master's program, my MFA program. Incidentally, if I was at the monastery, I'd never lift my leg like this. But, you know, I'm just not going to sit there and let my, you know, I've lifted one knee, you can do this. At the monastery, they'd shout at you if you lifted one knee. But, you know, I don't see any reason to sit here and suffer. I've done enough of that. But I was a little scared of Dido. I'd been to the monastery, and he was a imposing figure, a lot of gravitas, you know, and more than a touch of fierceness. And when he was to be at Naropa for 2 weeks, part of our work was to, oh wait, if I unmute myself here, does that help the echo? Does that help? Oh, maybe that's better. We'll try it. Anyway, no, it's not any better. Okay, it's worse.
Mute your sound.
Okay, I muted it. Okay.
Turn your volume down, I think.
Turn the volume down? Okay. Okay. Yeah, so I'd been to the monastery and I was kind of scared of him, and we all had to assign ourselves to be assistant to one of the faculty. He was going to be there for 2 weeks, so I thought, I'm scared of this guy. I want to know Zen very badly, deeply, and so I signed on as his assistant. And he kept up the stern Zen master thing for about 2 or 3 days, but you know, I was taking him shopping and helping take him to the store to buy toilet paper and stuff. You know, as his assistant around the clock, and in his photography workshops, which is mostly what he was doing. And just the barrier fell down. We started talking, and we basically became friends. But he's a major creative practice. Seeing, photography wanting to grab the image can sometimes get in the way of seeing, but it can also enhance seeing. And the way he used it, it was to enhance seeing. And I did a lot of those workshops as his assistant, and I was very grateful for that opportunity, because he had a way of seeing things fresh, or seeing the spirit or soul or essence of an object. He would have you sit with an object before photographing it. You know, it wasn't like grab the snapshot and move on, take a selfie with that tree. You know, it's like you don't press the shutter until you feel a oneness with the tree. That's how he worked. Yeah. And
Thank you so much. It's actually photography that brought me to Zen. Just that.
Him too. Yeah.
Present moment. It's it makes a lot of sense.
He had to trick himself into it was all about to make his photography better, because he was so anti-authoritarian. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Anyone else? Questions, comments, or anything to share?
I got another one. You and I were at a restaurant getting some takeout food, and you finally realized, oh, this was one of my students.
One of the wait persons. I said, oh, you look familiar. Yeah.
And I remember she said, kind of guiltily, oh, I haven't been meditating like I should. And you said, you know, that's not the reason to meditate, right?
Yeah.
You should meditate because you want to. Or
Yeah. You know, all of life is a creative act. Our meditation is surely a creative act. And so we have to find ways internally to keep it alive and to be actually excited. It's a great adventure. It's the greatest adventure into the human heart and mind. It's the greatest adventure we can ever undertake, in a way. You know, it's why are we people so effed up? You know, how are we going to find out if we don't look within ourselves? Because you can bet that if all those people are so effed up, we are too, right? In some way, there's some snarl in there that we could look into and understand. And maybe if we understand our dark places and our twisted places, maybe that thankfully aren't in charge of the whole thing. Maybe we'll understand how some of those people where the dark and twisted places are in charge. Maybe we'll understand and have some, empathy. Maybe know how to respond to some of the people out there who do so much damage. And the us against them doesn't really help, because we are them, aren't we? And that polarization is a lot of what the problem is. In my whole lifetime, it's been, now it's the blue states versus the red states, but it wasn't long ago. It was the communists versus so-called democracies, and before that it was the communists versus the fascists versus democracies. It's the whole story of recent history are those kind of oppositions of ideas and stories, which we make up, right? Yeah. Yes.
There's also a question in the chat there.
Oh, question in the chat, thank you, yeah. But go ahead, yeah. Remind me of your name again. Did you tell me your name before?
It's Julie.
Julie, right.
Yeah.
When you teach for 20 years, 25 years I've taught, you develop this terrifying delete function for names.
No worries.
Yeah. Julie, thank you.
One of the things that I most enjoy about my practice is when I do get to a still point, things get revealed to me. And so part of my discernment function is what's noise and what's signal. And whether this is right or not, I'm not sure, but in my practice, there's always an invitation for a signal. And I really treasure that, and look forward to the possibility that something, because I'm finally still enough. My body's finally still enough And this can happen not just in sitting practice, but in walking, hiking, being in nature, doing art. There's so part of my practice is just distinguishing between noise and signal, and I feel as though they both teach me how to distinguish between those two things.
Yeah, that's the discernment I was talking about. But it's a lovely way to put it, signal versus noise. Yeah. Sometimes there's a beautiful signal coming through the static, right? If we could only tune in the station.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Another of the paradoxes in Zen is we're cautioned against thinking or against intellect. But when we clear the decks, sometimes insight comes up partly through the thinking mind. If the thought comes up, all things are one, and it's rooted in experience, you're feeling that, and you're experiencing it, let that thought stay there and grow and ponder it. If you're just thinking all things are one and it's only in your head and you're not really feeling it, well, that's just pure intellect. But you're allowed to figure out where the intellect is serving practice, when it's signal and when it's noise, or when it's a kind of a false signal. We're telling ourselves that we feel the oneness, but when you feel it, right? Yeah. Thank you, Julie. Yeah. Somebody, let's see, was in the chat. Can active thought itself ever be the awareness of discernment or practice? Yeah, that's a tricky one. I'm a storyteller by trade. This book, One Bird, One Stone, is the collection of Western Zen stories that I did some years ago. Obviously, I deal in thoughts and words, right? But there's an old parable about how we can use thought in practice. It comes from the original Theravadan Zen. The analogy is, if you have a thorn stuck in your hand, you can use another thorn to remove the thorn, right? In the same way, we can sometimes use thought or the mind, just like when I was say to myself, that's a thought about the past. That's not what we're doing here. That's using that thought to just kind of cancel out the thought, and then both thoughts go away. So once you've got the thorn out of your hand, you don't hold on to the thorn you use, because you might never find another thorn. You just throw both thorns away, and next time you get a thorn, you can find another thorn, right? So it's like that. Yeah, there is thought can lead you to the edge, but then you have to dive off. It can't lead you to the depths of the great mystery. That's if we just stick with thought, then we're sticking with what we know, right? Do we know enlightenment perfectly now? Well, if we don't, then we don't know it. So knowing isn't going to help us. But it can take us to the edge. Many's the time I've been in a state of meditation, and I thought, oh, is this what they're talking about when they're talking about emptiness? Let me take a closer look. Or where is the self now? This is all about the self and the nature of the self, or no self. Is that what I'm experiencing? But then you don't go on thinking about that, You take a deeper look. You just go, oh, well, let me find out. Let me go further, So if thought's really taking a backseat to direct experience, it can sometimes function. It's not a hard and fast rule, I want to take a minute to just, if we could just close with, we're going to be out of time in a minute. And I want to respect everyone's time. If we could just take a minute and go back into our practice. And maybe center our breath in our hearts. I don't know if I quite said this. In Zen, we work with the hara a lot, or the dantian, center of gravity. So we tend to know that meditation's a physical practice, but it's easy to forget. Let's really let our attention drop into the body and into the heart region. And we have to allow, we want to stabilize and center ourselves so that we can be of use. It's like putting on your own oxygen mask before helping the person next to you on the airplane. It's a bit like that. We want to be steady and stable and centered, grounded. At the same time, having access that to some degree, it's never perfect, I don't think, then we really need to open our heart to the suffering of others. And I wonder if we could just take a moment or two. I'm particularly concerned right now about what's happening in Gaza. All the supply lines have been cut off for humanitarian aid into Gaza right now. And anyway, big suffering, right? We don't have to get political about it. We don't have to fall into despair because the world has suffering. This practice is about dealing with suffering. But we let it into our hearts to the degree that it helps us to care. And then if you know the meta phrases, you don't have to send it to Gaza. You can send, there's plenty of other suffering places and people. But maybe we could just, there's a version of the meta loving kindness phrases I like to use that uses 5 of the phrases. There's many versions, but the one I like is may you, or we can say may we, may all beings know happiness. May we all experience health, wellness. May all beings be safe, protected from harm. May all beings live at ease, at peace. At peace, at peace. May all be free from suffering. So this template of basic wishes is happiness, health, safety, ease, peacefulness, and freedom from suffering. Let me just take a minute and, the heart is an amazing organ. It's not just the physical organ, it goes beyond that. It's an amazing, just like the universe at large, the heart has the power to turn energies we might experience as negative and to allow those energies in and to emit them as positivity, as love. So we can imagine breathing our own unease into our hearts and letting, it's just energy, right? It's all just energy. In the greater universe, energies exchange all the time. So can we just let the heart give it out and release it as love? We can't get away from our unease anyway, but we can allow it to transform. But then we have to give it away completely. So can we just breathe out wishes for happiness, health, safety, peace, freedom from suffering? It's a wonderful practice to turn us away from our own self-interest, which we can get caught in practice. It's not all about making ourselves comfortable. Just like my students who say their families behave better. Let's let it radiate out. And thank you all. One last thing to say is, please, all of a sudden my screen looks foggy. I don't know if that's just because the light's changing, but $5 can save a child's life right now. If you send $5 to Mercy Corps or Red Cross or Doctors Without Borders, or it's really bad over there. And the biggest creative insight maybe that I've ever had in my practice is if, especially after I've been practicing for some years and it seemed to flatten out, is like, wait a minute, I've got to be giving all this away to others. I've got to be giving this away to others. I've got to be helping others with their practice, or the whole thing just doesn't go anywhere. So we can't allow it to become self-serving or narcissistic. We deserve some peace, some serenity. When these practices were kind of revitalized in ancient China, when they really started to take hold, it was a time of great famine. Something like 25% to a third of the whole country died between rebellions and famine. So these practices, and ancient India 1,000 years before wasn't so great either. So they came up in difficult times, and that's what they're for. Back then, you know, in China, they couldn't, you know, hold up a sign in front of the barbarian armies and say no war. You know, it wasn't going to work. But we can do something now that we couldn't do then. So please, even if you can only afford $5, please do something. And yeah, we need to save sentient beings. So thank you all. Lovely group of people.